Welcome to tonight's seminar, everyone. We look forward to having Jane Cochrane present tonight. My name is Peter Raftopoulos, President of the Ithacan Historical Society, which is proud to support our 2023 online lectures on the history of Ithaca and the broader Ionian region. Tonight's seminar will be presented by London-based architect and artist Jane Cochrane. Jane trained as an architect at the Architectural Association in London and worked principally on existing buildings, at a housing association and as a conservation architect. For several years, she also taught at the Bower Ashton School of Art in Bristol. She writes, paints, draws, and sometimes even makes pots. Together with her Greek-speaking husband, Alexis, she repaired an old house in Ithaca and has been visiting the island since 1982. Jane's passion for Ithaca has led her to write 2 books on her beloved island. Her first book was Odysseus Island, and her latest being a fascinating guide to the ancient Homeric paths called Walking in the Footsteps of Odysseus, a practical guide to the Homeric paths of Ithaca. Jane has walked the length and breadth of Ithaca, and her insights into the ancient pathways on the island will be most interesting to us, considering the work that has gone into preserving these paths from disappearing. These paths give us an insight into the Homeric past and the places they connected. I'm sure tonight's lecture will inspire you to trek them with Jane's guidebook in hand next time you visit Ithaca. Following tonight's seminar, there will be time to ask Jane questions, which we'll take from both YouTube and Zoom. We now warmly welcome Jane Cochrane to speak.
Hello, Peter. Can you hear me?
All's well, Jane. We can hear you perfectly.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you and see you perfectly.
Great. I can't see you, but anyway, there we go. Thank you very much indeed. Do you want me to share my PowerPoint now? Can you hear me? Yes. Can you see me now?
Yes, all good. You can go
Brilliant.
ahead. Press
Shall
play.
I go ahead?
You can press play and start the presentation.
Really good. Thank you, Peter, for that introduction. That was really lovely. Thank you. So, can everybody see this? Brilliant. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and the presentation looks great.
Brilliant. Well, I've published 3 books about Ithaca. I was going to introduce myself and my late husband, Alexis, and explain our connection with Ithaca. Alec was born in northern Greece. In London, but his parents came from Kastoria in northern Greece. This wonderful old photograph shows Alec's grandparents and his father's older siblings. Alec was a lawyer, but he worked as a maritime arbitrator. He was brought up in West London during World War II, and it was the 1950s before he went to Greece. He was amazed to find a whole country full of people speaking Greek, as this was the language his family spoke at home. And he thought of it as his own secret language. Alec took a huge interest in Greek culture and history. I'm a conservation architect, as Peter has said, and I've spent a lifetime rescuing ancient buildings, and I'm always interested in archaeology as well. In addition, though I say it myself, I'm a good sleuth. I like to get to the truth of the matter. But in relation to Ithaca, I'm just the messenger. All I've tried to do is explain the views of the most respected scholars in this field and the current situation on the island as I see it. The curious thing is that these scholarly opinions are so little known. They've been well hidden and often, even now, are denied. Alec and I first came to Chione in North Ithaca in 1982. We were the only tourists in Chione at that time. And actually it was love at first sight. This photograph was taken some years later, probably in the 90s. The village of Chione, like the rest of the island, had suffered in the comparatively recent past. Everybody here probably knows the history, but I'll run through it briefly. During World War II, Ithaca was occupied first by the Italians and then the Germans. The occupying armies were based in the south in Vathi. At that time, Vathi and Chioni were joined only by donkey tracks and footpaths, and there were no supplies from outside. World War II was followed by the Greek Civil War, and this was the final straw, a horrific earthquake in 1953. After the earthquake, only 30 houses were left standing in Chioni. Nearly all the young people and the children left the island after the earthquake. We found mostly old people left in the village. They formed a tight-knit community and kept up the old traditions. During World War II, there were around 1,000 people in Chioni, totally self-sufficient. But by the time we arrived, only about 180 people remained. The houses were interspersed with stone ruins and with small prefabs put up by the British. The self-sufficiency of the villagers was immediately evident, and to a large extent it still survives today. Back then, Chioni had its own bakery, and the bread was baked at night in a wood-fired oven built of stone. And in the morning, when the oven was still hot, the women brought tapsis full of stuffed vegetables to bake in it. At home, and in the 2 small tavernas, they cooked on simple gas rings with a calagas bottle. There was no water supply or rubbish collection in the village. In winter, people collected water from their roofs into their water sternas or cisterns. In summer, they used it carefully. On the whole, people didn't use canned food or bottled water, so rubbish was minimal. But what there was often just tipped down the hillside, I'm afraid to say. People kept donkeys, dogs, chickens, and turkeys. Each family had a small boat, which they took out to catch fish for their families and friends. The seas had many more fish back then. Small boats often had boats sometimes had a small motor, and others were rowed in the Venetian style by a standing oarsman. The shepherds kept goats and sheep, and some made feta in the slightly unhygienic workshops. There were no mechanical sounds in the air, simply those of animals, birds, and insects. At night, we listened to Scops owls and the occasional barking dog. We were woken in the morning by cockerels. It was a wonderful contrast to our hectic lives in central London. And actually, the local people were fascinated by Alec. He had so few visitors, and Alec was happy to sit and chat with them in Greek. On that first visit, an old man offered to sell us a house. We had no intention of buying a house in Ithaca, but since we were on holiday and with time on our hands, we went to see it. It turned out to be a ruin, not a habitable house. It was a semi-detached stone ruin, high up above the harbour in Rachi. It was a traditional design with a katoi or workshop on the ground floor where people trod the grapes to make wine. This precipitous stair led up to the living quarters on the first floor. Here you can see the room above on bottom right. It had a hole in the roof, and behind, top left, you can see the water sterner. I dropped a stone into it, but it was empty, bad sign. But I don't think Alec was interested in the house. After a brief look around, he stood with his back to it, looking out at the view, which was stupendous. It changed at every time of day. Anyway, we eventually got the house repaired. It took about 6 years. And we moved into a much smaller, but more compact, but more serviceable house. I suppose Alec and I, being a lawyer, he being a lawyer speaking Greek, and I an architect specializing in the repair of old buildings, were the ideal couple for this purchase. But even so, it took quite a long time. With the help of our good friend Captain John Paizes, we finally succeeded. And then the local people all came round. This was Nicola, the gravedigger, bringing us croupiat, half-rotted manure to put on our garden. We were fascinated by the self-sufficient lives they were leading, and they allowed us to join in their activities, such as grape picking and threading. They brought grapes down from the Ambelia, or vineyards, which were up beyond our house. And there's our friend Thanasi on the right, treading the grapes. And then it was fished out of a sort of wine well in the floor and poured into barrels. And finally, the stalks and things were squeezed in a machine like this and put out. The remains, as you can see in the pile, bottom left, were put out for the donkeys, who didn't like them much. We were also very interested in the windmills, which hadn't been used since World War II. In the 1980s, the mill at Rachi, near our house, was still in quite a good state, but the corrugated iron roof began to blow off, exposing the wooden machinery to the rain. Alec wanted to pay to replace the roof, and a friend who was a keen carpenter offered to mend the machinery, but the mill was owned by many people, mostly living in Australia, and our offer wasn't accepted. The owners might have feared we wanted to make some claim on the property. It was a shame, because the roof blew off and the machinery fell down and rotted. Anyway, we began to paint, or I began to paint, because the light and the colours of the landscape were incredibly beautiful. And I set up my easel, and then some friends came out. You can see them bottom right. And to my surprise, Alec, who'd said, well, what am I going to do, joined in. And he turned out to be a very good painter. We had no idea he could paint. He painted, this is a picture he did of the mill, seen from the other side, and an olive tree. He had a sort of pointilliste style. And this is a painting of our house, once the greenery had grown up. But my painting was quite different. It's a painting of boats down at Mavruna that I used for the cover of my book. And this is a picture of Kioni Harbour, seen from behind the Rachi Mill. And these are Spiros and Apostolis, brothers of Costa, who ran the local shop up at Rachi, coming in with their catch. However, Alec had many talents, but he was the worst driver I've ever known. As he drove, he used to gaze around at the landscape and paid no attention whatsoever to the road. This was particularly dangerous on the precipitous roads of Ithaca. On the other hand, he was keen on walking. So we spent a lot of time walking, and we walked up beyond the vineyards where many local people tended their vines, up to the high fields of the Vigla. In ancient times, this was a lookout place for pirates. When we were out walking, we met Dennis Sikiotis, father of Finn, who gave a talk here in Melbourne last year. Dennis was out with a group of Albanians who were helping him clear old footpaths. He'd managed to get funding for this. We soon became good friends with Dennis. And from 1994 onwards, some new archaeological work began to take place near his home in Stavros, at a site known as Ias Athanasios School of Homer. Dennis kept a good eye on this work, which sometimes took place during the winter when we weren't back in London. We always discussed the details of the work with him. The archaeologists in charge were a Greek couple, Litsa Kontoli Papadopoulou and Thanasis Papadopoulos. They were well-respected professors from the University of Ioannina in central Greece. They were specialists in the Mycenaean era, the time of Odysseus. This slide has a brief biography to show some of their qualifications as archaeologists, which were considerable. They were searching for evidence of the palace of Odysseus on Ithaca. The Papadopoulos couple first made exploratory excavations at Iatos. I don't know if you can, oh yes, I've got a little arrow. Iatos is down here, and then also in the north of Ithaca, where this is a larger map here. There's Polybe. Stavros, the ancient city, was meant to be to the west of Stavros. Trislegades, which was a Mycenaean fishing village, probably, it's never been excavated. There's Pilicata and Iasaphnasis, School of Homer. That's about just less than a kilometre between those two. Benton, and this followed on the footsteps of some English archaeologists called Sylvia Benton and William Hertley, who made groundbreaking discoveries in Ithaca in the 1930s. Benton was, there she is, a pioneering archaeologist whose perceptive insights, both in Ithaca and Kythera, have since been proved correct. In the 1930s, Hertley and Benton decided the Palace of Odysseus must have been either at Pilicata, this was Hertley's idea, or Iasaphnasis, as Benton believed. Unfortunately, at this point, World War II broke out and they were recalled to the UK. Benton returned to Ithaca after the war, and again after the earthquake. She reinstated their finds and the museums that had been damaged. In the 1930s, Benton made spectacular discoveries related it directly to the Homeric story. The cave at Polybe was half submerged below the sea. It was sometimes called Louisos Cave, after a local man who owned the land in the 19th century. Dr. Louisos, as he was called, did the Ithacans no service. He dug up 200 graves on the adjacent shoreline and took what he could from the cave. Luckily for future generations, the cave had suffered an earlier collapse due to an earthquake in classical Greek times. Without this, Louisos would have taken everything. He took the treasure to Paris, where he sold it and lived in luxury for the rest of his life. Louisos was not the only person to loot artifacts from Ithaca. There's a huge amount of looting, especially during the 19th century. In the British Museum, there's a grand cup and a couple of swords from Ithaca. I don't think we should honour the old thief, Louisos, any longer by naming the cave at Polybe after him, so I shall now call it the Poly Cave. In the 1930s, Benton pumped out the water from the cave, and below the sea she found a stratification of the ground intact. That is Sylvia Benton up here in the photograph. Amongst her discoveries were 12 grand bronze tripod lebetes. That's one on the right, about a metre high, just in pieces, but they were very grand. They dated from a time after Odysseus, but before Homer. A tripod lebes was originally a cooking pot, where the cauldron, the lebes, on the top, was supported over a fire on 3 legs, the tripod. These bronze tripods were often given as prizes for athletic games. I've explained in my books, Odysseus Island and Walking the Footsteps of Odysseus, the Homeric significance of these tripods. And as I'm a bit pushed for time, I won't repeat it. But basically, they have 3 main points of significance. Firstly, the number of tripods found relates to the Homeric story. Secondly, the number is very large for a small island, such as Ithaca, and it indicates an important shrine in the ancient past. And thirdly, these bronze tripods were given as prizes for athletic games. Benton believed that the flat land behind Polybe was once used for athletic games, where these tripods were given as prizes, and this makes sense. A 3rd century BC inscription called the Inscription of Magnesia was discovered at an archaeological site in Magnesia in modern Syria or thereabouts. The Australian Jonathan Brown, who's given a talk here, has described carefully in his book, In Search of Homeric Ithaca, about the inscription. In it, the people of Ithaca invite the people of Magnesia to their athletic games, which were called the Odysseus, a name with an obvious reference to Odysseus. These games predated the Olympic Games by at least 2 centuries. Benton believed that after the time of Odysseus, the polycave was used to hero worship him. This idea is supported by a sherd in pottery that she discovered from a mask in the mask was from the 2nd century BC. It has an inscription, Ethin Odyssei, meaning an offering to Odysseus, scratched into it, and it's now in the small museum on the outskirts of Stavros. Also, coins showing the head of Odysseus can be seen in the Archaeological Museum of Vathie when it's open. They were all found on Ithaca, and none have been discovered on other islands. This coinage also proves that the modern island of Ithaca was called Ithaca and known as the home of Odysseus way back in the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. You can see this is Odysseus with his little traveling hat. And here it says Ithacan of the Ithacans. The cockerel is a symbol of Ithaca. That's the goddess of Athena. And there you can say see Itha again. And this one, I don't know if you can see this one, also has Ithacan on it. In the early 21st century, there was a flowering of claims from elsewhere to be the actual home of Odysseus. This time it was not Lefkas, but one or other peninsula of Kefalonia, claiming to be the true Homeric Ithaca. There's no consistency between these claims. The main claims were, in 2005, a British management consultant called Robert Bittlestone made a well-publicized claim for the Peliki Peninsula in Kefalonia. That's this one here. Then the same year, Mayor Metaxas of Poros is down here, said that this part of Kefalonia was actual Homeric Ithaca. Then in 2010, a Dutchman called Gokoop claimed that this part of Kefalonia was around Fiscado, was Kefalonia. In addition, it was Homeric Ithaca. In addition, Bittlestone made a false claim that his part had been a separate island. He thought that it was separated here at the time of Odysseus, but a team of geologists from the University of Athens under Professor Maroukian thoroughly investigated this idea, a 63-page investigation, and in their words, demolished it. But Bittlestone's descendants still try to collect money for their attempts to prove his false theory. There are remnants from the Mycenaean era on Kefalonia, and like Zakynthos, it was part of Odysseus's kingdom. But none of the Kefalonian theorists were able to produce archaeological evidence of any palace structure relating to the words of Homer. The kingdom of Odysseus, according to the catalogue of ships in the Iliad, Book 2, was centered on Ithaca, but it took in Ithaca, Kefalonia, which was called Samos or Sami at the time, and Zakynthos, which is further to the south on this slide. And they also had a little piece of the mainland, which was probably up here near Actium Airport. And this professors, it seems to be that modern Levkas here was called Dulichium, but that's not certain. Nobody can be sure about that. Anyway, at this point, here we are. So the kingdom of Odysseus was Ithaca, Samos, Zakynthos, and a little bit of the mainland. It may seem these days that Ithaca is well off the beaten track, But this was not so at the time of Odysseus. Then it was on the main sea lanes from the center of civilization, which was okay over here in the Middle East, and round, the ships came round here through either side of Ithaca, hugging the coast because they were open ships, up to what is now modern Corfu, and across the Otranto Strait to the heel of Italy and Sicily too, I expect. Now at this point, about 2013, Alec's health was going out downhill, his balance was bad, and disaster struck. That's Alec on the left. And actually my mother on the right, who often used to come out to Ithaca. In 2014 in London, he fell downstairs, and a week later he died. We held a memorial service in London, and the service was also held by the local people in the church in Rathi. The following year, my mother also died. I continued to come to Ithaca, but the paintings that I did at that time became very dark. A sad thing was that as soon as the archaeologist, Litsa Kontoli-Papadopoulou, announced the discovery of a megaron from the time of Odysseus at Aias Athanasios, the money for further excavation, which comes through the effort in Kefalonia, was withdrawn and the site was left half excavated. In 2015, the year my mother died, Litsa Kontoli-Papadopoulou also died. She hadn't written up or published her work on the site at Aias Athanasios. When I finally finished work on Alec's and my mother's affairs, I wanted to remember happier times. I picked up the blue exercise books from my bookshelf in London and began to reread the stories I'd written about Ithaca in the 1980s and 90s. I wrote them out and filled in a few gaps with local information. Because of Bittlestone, Mare Metaxas, and Goku putting in claims for parts of Kefalonia as Homeric Ithaca, I added a short piece about the objects on Ithaca that I've described, which link the Homeric hero Odysseus to this island and no other. Others showed an interest, so I decided to get my writing edited and publish it, but I was worried. I felt the piece about the tripods, the sherd, and the coinage in the museum in Vathi should be checked by a professional in this field. I asked around for a classicist who might check this part of my script for me, and I was recommended that if he would agree to it, the person who would really know about this was the emeritus professor George Huxley. Now, Huxley was a very eminent professor of classics and a philologist, archaeologist, mathematician. I put a few of his many qualifications onto this slide. He asked me to send him a copy of what I'd written. I did this, and then he rang and suggested that I come and visit him at his home, where he lived with his archaeologist wife, Davina. The moment I got there, I realized I'd struck gold. George and Davina were delightful, lovely people, and he was astonishingly erudite. On his dining room table, he'd laid out a number of books and paper and a huge Barrington Atlas of classical Greece that referred directly to the subject concerned. First, he went meticulously through the little piece, my little piece, making comments and corrections and suggesting books that would add further clarification. Then he explained how he came to have an interest in the subject of Ithaca. In 2007, Huxley had attended a lecture given by Bittlestone at the British Museum, and this had caused him some disquiet. Bittlestone had drawn a blue line through a satellite image of Kefalonia to show how Peliki was a separate island at the time of Odysseus and Homer. The recorded sounds of ravens were played and books were signed and sold. It was a great show, but Huxley was shocked by what he heard. Afterwards, he expressed his misgivings to his good friend, Robert McCabe, a well-known photographer and a fellow trustee at the American School of Classical Studies in Athens. McCabe suggested that George and Davina Huxley should be their guests on a voyage by sea around Ithaca and Kefalonia to check the ancient texts and landscapes against the claims made by Bittlestone. The Huxleys and McCabe's made their trip in 2007. They took with them the most accurate version of the texts of the Odyssey in ancient Greek, along with other learned books, including the Periplus of Pseudo-Skylax made in the 4th century BC. This Periplus guided the seamen from landmark to landmark before there were any maps. They followed the route taken by Odysseus' son Telemachus on his return to Ithaca from Pylos. Pylos is down there. And Telemachus would have travelled in an open boat like this, hugging the shore, and going in normally for the night. Anyway, and they checked out, unlike the voyages of Odysseus, this route is very carefully described by Homer. And they also checked out the Bittlestonian claims on Kefalonia. That November, Huxley gave a lecture to the Friends of the British School at Athens at London University. The title was Ulysses Redux, Why the Island Called Ithaca Today is Homer's Ithaca. He also gave a lecture at the Classics Department at Harvard University in America and wrote a careful and thorough review analysing the textual justification given by Bittlestone. He and McCabe were going to publish the results of their investigation, but sadly they never did this. Huxley was delighted that I was taking up this subject, and he gave me his original lecture notes. I spent a year following up his references in books at the British Library and visited him several more times. Huxley is a philologist, and his explanation of the texts of the Odyssey are complex, but some people want a one-liner to stand up against the theories of the Kefalonians. For this, I suggest they read the Odyssey, Book 9, lines 21 to 24. Here, Odysseus, in a speech to the king of Queen of Phaeacia, now modern Corfu, explains that he comes from Ithaca, which has a conspicuous mountain called Neriton and is surrounded by other islands. These lines clearly describe the same Greek island of Ithaca that we know today. I then had far too much material for my book. I summarized Huxley's views as briefly as I could in the final 3 chapters of my book, Odysseus Island. He read and approved everything I'd written. I must stress again that I am simply the messenger. The views that I present were made by people infinitely better qualified than me. My task was to check Huxley's views on the ground in Ithaca and to report back. I found that all his ideas checked out and made perfect sense. I also checked the sites of the Kefalonian theories, and they didn't add up. Unfortunately, Huxley died at the end of November last year, but not before he'd given me full benefit of his views on the subject of Ithaca. However, his visit to Ithaca was made principally to check the views of Bittlestone, which he considered systematically and rejected. He made his visit to Ithaca in 2007, before the Papadopoulos couple announced their discoveries, and he never met them. This was a different strand of discovery. After the death of Litsa Kontoli Papadopoulou, the half-excavated archaeological site at Ias Athanasios became increasingly neglected. In 2018, I was still searching for some information about the dig, when on a visit to the site with my grandson, I met 2 women. They were holding in their hands a wonderful isometric drawing, like this. One woman had been a fellow archaeologist assisting in the dig. The other was a journalist who wrote for Ithaca News. An isometric drawing, like this, is projected up from an accurate scale plan drawing. The 2 women were checking the column bases, which were still visible, of the Megaron, that's the great hall thought to be that of Odysseus. They also had an elevation drawing of the Megaron showing the palace built in Cretan style. These wonderful drawings stuck firmly in my mind. They were obviously done by someone who knew a whole lot more than I did about the discoveries made at Ias Athanasios. I had no idea who'd done them, but only a few days later, I discovered who it was, and it was someone I knew well. In Rachi, we had a neighbor, a fellow architect, Dimitris Skirianis, who often used to come to our house and told Alec in Greek about the latest finds at Ias Athanasios. He showed us photographs of the finds. I remember seeing a photo of a bronze casting stone from the Mycenaean era that had been discovered at the site. Because my Greek language skills were not that good, it was only now that I discovered that Dimitris had been the official visual recorder for the Papadopoli excavation at Ias Athanasios. Dimitri had done the wonderful drawings I had seen, and many others. Again, I'd struck gold. Dimitri doesn't live full-time in Ithaca, but next time he came, he showed me his drawings. He told me that they'd found a Mycenaean bath, similar to that displayed centrally in the palace of King Nestor near Pylos, but much more complete. He explained that he'd been with Thanasis and Litsa, Papadopoli, early in the evening when she had a stroke, and how she had died in hospital only a week later. He told me how Thanasis himself had been very unwell, and that the doctor had forbidden him to travel as far as Ithaca, but that if I came to Athens, he would take me to see him. Of course, I said, yes, please. And the following week, I got on a ship and a bus and went to Athens. Thanasis Papadopoulos, who may even be listening to this talk, was most gracious. He showed me a heavy book recording a conference held at the Archaeological Department in Ioannina in 2016. There, a year after his wife died, he gave a paper concerning Mycenaean citadels of Western Greece, and into the middle of it, he had inserted a description illustrated by photographs and with some drawings by Dimitris Skirianis of the work at Ias Athanasios School of Homer. This paper was written in English. It was by far the best report that I'd seen of their work. However, the title was most off-putting. The paper was called Mycenaean Citadels of Western Greece, Architecture, Purpose, and Their Intricate Role in the Local Communities and Their Relations with the West. No one would guess from that title that an account of the archaeological work on Ithaca was hidden inside it. Papadopoulos gave me an author's copy of his article, which was covered in copyright messages from the Belgian publisher. By this time, I had far too much material to fit into the book I'd written, so I made a précis of both Huxley's views and Papadopoulos' paper, added a bit more explanation in the notes section at the end, and published at the end of 2019 as Odysseus Island. I'd like to summarize the important discoveries that were made by the Papadopoulou couple, Litsa and Thanasis, perhaps I could say. Not only did they discover remains of walls and buildings from Mycenaean era of Odysseus, but these discoveries, as I have explained, have remained well hidden. The buildings were arranged on two levels. The main hall was at the lower level, and there was a kind of cliff in between. Behind the main hall here, that's thought to have been a religious building. 3 staircases go up the cliff. You can see 2 here, and there's another over here, I think. And the women's quarters, Penelope's bedroom, is thought to have been here, which was later demolished, and there's a later tower from the Hellenic era, about the 3rd century BC here. And they began to excavate here a place which they thought was probably a women's hall. They also found a bronze casting workshop here. The broken bath was also discovered at the upper level. In the Odyssey, it describes how Penelope heard the words of a stirring ballad coming from down in her quarters, wafting up from the main hall. So that fits with what they discovered. The main men's megaron, where Homer visualized Odysseus' great battle with the suitors, was on the lower level. The remains of a fireplace was discovered, bottom right, and a rock carved into the shape of an ox-hide ingot is thought by Professor Papadopoulos to have been an altar from the time of Odysseus. That's top right. The bones of an auroch were also found on the site. This is a huge prehistoric bull or cow of a species now extinct. It was probably given in sacrifice to the gods. The archaeologists uncovered a fortified settlement from the Mycenaean era of Odysseus of some 23 hectares. That's about 57 acres in extent. They found 3 gateways through the Mycenaean walls, one there, one here, and one here. And also a well from the Mycenaean era here. These coloured bits show the bits that were excavated, and that is the modern tower, modern 3rd century BC, but more modern than Odysseus. In consultation with Lexicon-Tolly Papadopoulou, Dimitri made drawings of how the buildings on this site might have looked in Mycenaean times inside. These drawings are not, however, just fantasies. On this one, you can see Odysseus trying to shoot his arrow through the axe heads. The site was very carefully gridded up, surveyed, and the foundations of the Mycenaean times were all measured. These are some of the survey drawings. And this is a Mycenaean wall, which we also drew carefully. And this is a survey of a Mycenaean well on the site. It had a corbelled roof. They invited a leading authority and specialist in hydraulic techniques, Professor Naus of the Technical University in Munich, to inspect the well. He compared it with those at Mycenae, Tiryns, Aya Irenikeas, and Hattusa, and dated it firmly to the Mycenaean period of Odysseus. My book, Odysseus Island, received a surprising amount of interest. I decided to follow it up with a book more specifically about the walks that could be taken on Ithaca, in the footsteps of Odysseus, as described in the Odyssey. Following the studies George Huxley had set me and the checks I'd made on the ground, I knew quite a bit about this subject. Both walking the footsteps of Odysseus and Professor Papadopoulos' paper about the excavation at Athanasios were published. I pulled out the bit about Ithaca and published it separately in 2022. And then I had another piece of luck. A keen walker, an experienced journalist, Nigel Summerlee, kindly helped me check the walks and edited my final version of the books. Before I finish, I'd like to give a brief update on the current situation regarding conservation of the site at Athanasios. The site, as it stands, is romantic, but vulnerable to pilfering and dangerous to visitors. It's fenced, but the gates are sometimes locked and sometimes open. The excavation pits are open following a bad storm, and there's no signage or information at all on the site. When, around 2011, the money for further excavation was withdrawn, temporary covers were put in place over the excavation pits. This photograph shows the covers over the excavation area of the main megaron hall at the lower level. On the upper level, the excavation pits of the casting stone and other excavation areas were also covered. In September 2020, Ithaca was hit by a terrible storm, and these covers were destroyed. The following spring, the site was cleaned up and the remains of the covers were burned. In addition, the Archaeological Museum in Vathie has been closed for the last 2 years. In the back rooms of the museum are over 100 boxes, some say 200, of unsorted finds from Aias Athanasios. These should be sorted, restored, and labelled, and objects that relate to Odysseus should be displayed. This should be done right away. I don't know why this museum is still closed. It's been closed for 2 years. I've heard that loos are being installed, but I don't understand how this work could take 2 years. I've heard the museum needs a new license to open, but who issues these licenses and why haven't they done it? I hear a new museum is planned, but is there really money for a new museum? I doubt it. And if there is, it should be built on a separate site. Given the serious situation up at the site and with the fines, a new building doesn't seem to me to be a #1 priority. The new museum in Vathie is not very up to date, but it's much better than nothing, and it should be reopened immediately. As last winter approached, the Bronze Age casting stone and altar at Aias Athanasios seemed particularly at risk. An Australian archaeological student who, like me, is concerned about the situation, actually I think he's listening to this talk, went and put tarpaulins over them. It seems pathetic that even this minimal level of protection had not been carried out by the appropriate authorities. It now seems clear that the heroon of Odysseus, the place where he was hero worshipped, was centered on the triangle of land between Polybe, Helicata, and Aias Athanasios. This whole area, both on land and under the sea, actually, should be protected. It should be made safe for visitors, and information should be provided in a modern and imaginative way. This work should be done whether or not others believe that the site known as Aias Athanasios was that of a residence of a historical King Odysseus. These arguments are irrelevant and actually rather boring. This is a known Mycenaean site, and as such, it should be properly protected. Odysseus is Ithaca's most important historical figure. He's a symbol of the island's identity. We should not allow his name and fame to be stolen by other islands. Reputable scholars are in agreement that Homeric and modern Ithaca are one and the same, so we should not allow this to be questioned. Odysseus has huge symbolic significance for the people of Ithaca, and through the work of Homer, he's a figure of worldwide renown. That's all, really. I say stop share.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Jane.
Can you see me still?
We can still see you.
Great.
Excellent. So thank you very much for your wonderful presentation on Ithaca's fascinating Homeric past. I'm sure all of us now have a broader range of Ithaca's ancient history, and after listening to your seminar, we'll look forward to using your guidebooks and reading your other books about Ithaca next time we are on Ithaca. Your work has been really invaluable in recording this unique and ancient aspects of Ithaca, and we thank you for your passion and your diligent work to record all that information in your books and make it available for everyone to have access. So we look forward to now, Jane, being able to open to the public and ask any questions so we can have an animated discussion going forward for a little while.
Thank you, Peter.
I'll just
Are you going? Yeah.
I'll just so we've got a first question from Jerry Crusavianos. If you'd like to unmute, that's it, Jerry.
Thank you, Peter. I would comment and then a question that relates to it. Jane, look, it was fabulous listening to you and and you are taking account of the history, some of it which I myself have tried to understand and read and so on. In terms of the museum up in Stavros, my cousin Fortigny was the volunteer keeper of the museum for many, many, many years. Didn't get paid, but she was the person who tried to keep it open. Unfortunately, she got very sick recently and her husband died, and there was no way she could look after it. And because they had no way of, nobody had figured out a way of succession or what to do, we listened to a talk by the mayor of Athens, who assures us that there is processes going on of moving all this stuff to a museum in Stavros, but he was vague about how and where and why. They're not even sure what building, but he was saying that the mayor and his people are very much aware of the need to open the museum. So that's just background from what I know, and what's happened to the museum. And I agree, there's my cousin told me of so much stuff that's in there that needs to be looked at. This comes to the question of the archaeological work. My daughter's an archaeologist, and she tells me that archaeological sites get owned by academic universities. So the University of Ioannina owns the site. And again, the mayor of Athens has said to us that he's putting some pressure or trying to convince the University of Ioannina to do something. But of course, the central figures who are doing that are no longer around to do it. Two questions. Why was the funding stopped? Why did all this archaeological work stop? And what can be done to bring it forward? Because it's great that you've got all this work, but I think it's archaeologists who can dig further and open this up and make it available and publish it in not these vague papers that you identified, but actually in quite significant journals that will eventually kill off all these other fake stories of where Ithaca is. So the two parts of the question: A, why did it stop? And what is your view about getting it started again?
Well, I don't know exactly why it stopped, but the money was immediately withdrawn after the announcement was made about the discoveries of Papadopoulos, which is rather suspicious. And actually, in the following years, quite a lot of new sites were opened up in Kefalonia. But in any case, and hurdles, all sorts of hurdles were put in her place, bureaucratic hurdles. But in any case, at present, the University of Ioannina has no money. And but it needs, I think it probably needs pressure from outside politically to move this forward. But I mean, I'm not either a politician or an archaeologist. So, and I've had no...
In this modern day, they also need a philanthropist or sponsors. Archaeology is not something that is easily funded by the public purse. And many archaeological sites are successful because they get sponsors or philanthropists who support them. And maybe the mayor of Ithaca, who's talking about it, should try and actually get some sort of fund together, a foundation or something, to actually
Somebody should
support.
do it. Yes, it's true. And I don't know who would be the best person to do it. Probably it needs pressure from outside, I believe myself, and possibly even a collection of funds from outside as well. But this is something, you know, not my field of expertise.
No, I understand. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks for those questions. If there's anyone else, just Debbie, have you got a question to no? No, not a question. I've got a question, Jane, about your guidebook. I'd just like to ask, which is your favourite walk of your book that I've been going through myself, and I rather enjoyed reading.
Yes. Oh, I loved walking down in the very south, actually, where Marathias Plain. It's so beautiful down there. It's stunning. And we made where Umas the swineherd is meant to have lived. That walk up from the Perapiyadi Bay down and up there, it's so remote and so beautiful. Stunning, actually, down there. The south of Ithaca is very uninhabited and a wonderful place for walking.
How long did that take you to walk? Because I drove around that little area and it was quite treacherous almost.
Yes, it is a bit. Well, my walk checker, Nigel, did manage to get up the cliff, but I am not advising anybody else to do that. He just wanted to make sure that it would have been possible way back. But the proper footpath now just comes from the main road along to where the spring is, Arethusa Spring. Stunning area, yes. It was in the 19th century, there's some wonderful prints that were made of that area. And a painting by Edward Lear as well. So, yeah, it's a very fascinating area.
Yes, stunning little spot there. A question from Andrew Raftopoulos, please.
Hello, Paul, and hello, Jane. Thanks for your talk. I was just going to chip in on that Arethusa Spring path, which last time I was there about 6 years ago, I probably a bit late in the day, and the start of that path there's a made road, I think, up to that point, and it's fairly clearly marked with a signpost to Arethusa Spring. And I set off, and it was about 5 in the afternoon on a September afternoon, and I thought I had no idea of how long it would take, and I just set off, and I probably got about halfway down, and I thought discretion is the better part of valor, because parts of it were quite rough, although at the beginning it's well paved in some nice stone paving. So they've done work there, and I look forward to going back when I've got more time and completing the journey. But I, like you, find that, or on that occasion, found that southern part of Ithaca quite fascinating, quite eerie, actually. The area there's quite deserted, and I was there all by myself late in the afternoon. I had my car, but I could only take it so far. And it's got quite an eerie quality about it, I find, and it's well worth visiting.
Yes, I went down there on my own first time, and I have to say I began to wonder whether I'd been sensible. And yes.
Yes, the same. It was quite spooky.
Yes, but it's a marvellous place. Yes.
It is. I'd like to
man lives at the top, still, who I think comes to Australia sometimes. Spiros, is he called? He still runs a farm at the top in the same position that Umas was meant to.
Yes, I noticed there's a little farmyard and farmhouse further on from the beginning of the path to the spring. And also there's a weird structure there, which you may know about. Just before the farm, there's this concrete bunker Very,
yes, there is. Yeah,
very
full of
good.
rather rude graffiti.
Yeah, is that something?
I
left
think that must be a
the
World War
wall,
II
or-
thing.
Yeah, so that's what I felt. It's quite a
Yeah. And there's a
prominent
cave.
faith. Sorry.
There's a wonderful cave known as
Yes,
Humair's.
there's Odysseus cave, I think it's called.
Yes.
Not
No,
far
well, there
away.
is Regis. There's another one as well called Humair's Cave. You have to go right down a rather
Eumaeus, yeah,
steep slope to get to that
that's
as
right.
well. Which
And-
is wonderful.
Past, I'm not sure, they're on maps, and if you look at Google Earth, there appears to be an existing path beyond that farmhouse, heading towards the southernmost tip of
Yes,
the
there is.
island. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
Have you traversed that? Do you?
I have. I didn't go right to the end, but my grandson did.
Right.
And there's a little chapel
Little
at the
chapel,
end
yes.
with a handbell.
And-
And yes,
And then
in
there's
a
a
rocky place, you couldn't land a ship there.
no,
Very
it's quite
easy shoreline.
quite steep.
Mm.
And it appears that you then turn north along that, on that, what is the western side of the island, going towards Athos. But is that a properly maintained track, or is it in disrepair?
You mean across round by the monastery and round to Athos?
If you get to the southern part of that chapel that you mentioned, somewhere in there, and I'd have to look at a map, but it feels as though it's possible that there is a monopati or track leading northwards back up towards Athos. And that's
I think there is. Yes,
Athos.
I believe there is, and that has been very neglected.
Yes.
And somebody, so I think maybe Jonathan Brown may have checked that out. But
Yes.
it isn't sort of walkable at present.
Oh, okay.
But there is a track there, I believe, yes, through between the mountains on the south side end of the island. It'd be nice if somebody would check that out and open it up.
Or maybe my next trip.
Yeah, maybe.
Thank you, Jane. That's wonderful.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Appreciate your question there. Eri, we've got a question from Eri, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hello. I'm the daughter of the architect, Mr. Dimitris Kyrianis. And I was just, hello, Jane.
Hello.
Very nice to meet you, even like this. So thank you very much for your presentation. It was really, really good. And all your paintings also are very nice. I'm a painter also myself. I was thinking about the situation in Ithaca, about the museum and everything. I think we have to overcome a lot of negative forces and behaviors and a lot of indifference. And maybe we can start from something like collecting signatures, you know, people can sign
a petition.
Right, we can make a petition at first place, signed by you, my father, Mr. Papadopoulos, you know, so that people can understand which is at last, which is what we want, okay? Because we talk about it here, but that's not enough. This must go outside of the Zoom room. You know what I mean. You understand?
I do. Yes, absolutely.
So maybe a first step could be
it's
that.
a good idea.
A little first
who would
step.
you send the petition
Because
to?
There is
to
so
Mrs.
much.
Brendoni?
To the Ministry of Culture, to the Department of
Mrs.
Archaeology.
Bendonis. Mm.
Hmm? The
Your
Ministry
dad
of
said,
Culture of Greece, the Ministry of Culture of Greece, and the Archaeology Department of the ministry.
yes, that's a good
Okay.
idea.
Yes, this must stop. I mean, it's such a very important place. Okay, and
Exactly.
the whole idea that tourists are going there to search for the Homeric Ithaca, and they find only ruins that mean nothing, like as they are.
Yes.
It means nothing. It must
Yes.
be organized somehow, but we have to ask for it.
Yes.
So maybe if
definitely.
we organize a little text, very concise, and 3 points, this and that, and we demand the reconstruction of the archaeological site, which is in a complete terrible situation, because I have seen it on my own also, and also the opening of the museum in Vathi, which is. The museum is fantastic. I've been there. It needs an air condition because it's really hot inside, and it needs the new findings have to be shown up.
Definitely. Properly.
There's nothing. It's so simple. I mean,
but there are archaeologists worldwide who would be interested in this, in doing this work, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
so much red tape everywhere.
Yes.
It's destructive, it's nothing can go on like that. We have to act like a community that cares for the continuation of not only the excavations, but at the point where we are now, we have to show to the people what is there. Okay, we don't have to find new things. We only have to show what is there.
What is already there. And your father has done beautiful drawings. They should be displayed.
Exactly. They are fantastic.
Fantastic drawings. And the finds that have been made should be properly recorded and photographed and the best ones shown. But I think that they should concentrate on the ones that relate to Odysseus first, because that's what's important to this particular island. But there are tons of finds from later on Roman times and Hellenic times, but it's the ones that relate to Odysseus's time that are most important for the identity of the island, in my view.
It's definitely some good points to consider, I think, and something we will probably take up in the months ahead as we continue to make our voices known. And I'm sure, Jane, you'd be interested to continue, with your work, and also, as Eri said, to push forward to see if we can get some funding to excavate certain sites and open them up for the public, not have them closed and neglected like they've been for so long.
It'd be wonderful if the Ithacan Historical Society of Melbourne could, be a central point for some of this.
Absolutely, something we could consider.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant, because obviously
exactly.
your name has much more help than mine.
That would be very helpful, because it would show that the whole world cares about it, not just somebody in Ithaca,
Exactly.
Because if it is only narrowed inside the borders of Greece or of an island, nothing will be, so strong to promote something, It has to be a global character there.
Absolutely.
That's what I do.
I'm sure we'll take that up in the foreseeable future, and then advocate a little to get those things moving so that we can explore the past of Ithaca and enjoy the rich culture that we do have. And I'm sure I'll be able to talk to my committee and put that forward to see if we can make that a more visible push towards getting the cultural ministry to do something in the future. So we'll work together all together and use our various means to push that forward. So thank you very much, Jane. Really appreciate you being with us.
Thank you very much, Peter, and to Kyriako too. Yeah, I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's great.
We really appreciate it. And I encourage everyone to go on Amazon and get a copy of your books. Especially, yeah, all three, the two that you've written yourself, and also
the paper by Professor Papadopoulos. Yes,
that's right. The one you published about Euthanasius. It's a great paper in itself that I read myself.
We'll try and get Huxley's original lecture notes published as well.
Absolutely. No, that's
great.
Fantastic.
You,
all right, then we'll wrap up because we've been going for about an hour and a half. So we really appreciate your presence. And if you have any other questions, directed through the Ithacan Historical Society. We're here to help all Ithacans and the cultural side so that we can push forward and develop more connections between Ithacans and lovers of Ithaca. And we look forward to meeting on Ithaca when we can together. So thank you very much. And we'll
thank you, Peter.
Bye. Thanks very much.